Last night was supposed to be a simple dinner. Carlos, my husband, had been talking about this trendy new restaurant downtown for weeks, and finally we went, just the two of us and his old college friends Alex and Becky. The place was packed, noisy, full of people cheering about some local sports game I didn't really follow. The vibe was lively, the energy infectious, and honestly I was kind of enjoying myself at first, even though I always feel a little out of place around Carlos's college friends. I didn't go to school with them, so I usually just listen while they reminisce and swap inside jokes. That night was no different, stories flying around, laughter echoing off the walls, drinks clinking. I was mostly quiet, sipping my wine and smiling politely. Then Alex turned to Carlos and asked, "So how did you two meet again?" I smiled, ready to tell the story I've told 100 times. But Carlos jumped in before I could speak. "She basically begged me to date her," he said with this exaggerated eye roll and smug grin. My mouth went dry. I froze mid-sip, wineglass hovering. Everyone laughed, but it wasn't the good kind. It was awkward, confused. He wasn't done. "Look at her, desperate, average. I was just bored." He gestured toward me like I was a punchline. My chest burned. My fingers clenched around the glass. Was this really happening? I sat there frozen, gripping my wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. No one spoke for a second. Becky laughed first, one of those weird, nervous laughs people do when they don't know what else to do. Then Alex chuckled too, but it sounded forced. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. Carlos was still grinning like he just nailed the punchline at a comedy show. The appetizers arrived right then, and everyone suddenly found something to do with their hands, forks scraping plates, napkins unfolding, anything to avoid the awkward silence. But Carlos wasn't finished. He took a sip of his whiskey and said, "Honestly, I'm only still with her because I don't have time to train someone hotter." I looked at him in disbelief like he was a stranger. Alex mumbled, "Damn, bro," and Becky buried herself in her phone. Still, no one told him to stop. I felt myself shrinking inside like I was disappearing from my own body. 5 years of marriage, and he was performing my humiliation like it was some kind of twisted stand-up act. I finally found my voice. "Carlos, what the hell?" I asked. He didn't flinch, just rolled his eyes. I stared at Carlos, barely recognizing him. This man sitting beside me, laughing at my expense, was not the man who told me he loved me last week. I whispered, "Carlos, stop." But he didn't. He shrugged like I was overreacting. "What? I'm just being honest. They're my friends. They should know the real you." Then he turned to them. "She thinks I don't notice how she checks my phone when I'm in the shower." My jaw dropped. I had never once touched his phone, not ever. The lie hit like a slap. Becky finally spoke up. "Maybe we should order more drinks?" Her voice was thin, clearly trying to smooth things over. Carlos waved her off. "No, I'm just getting started," he said like this was some personal roast. "You want to know why I really married her?" No one answered. I was frozen. He leaned in, voice low but sharp. "Let's be real, no one else wanted her. I did her a favor." Something inside me cracked. The hurt turned to fire. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, stunned, while everyone else avoided looking at me. The waiter arrived with our entrees, setting down plates like nothing was wrong. Alex said something about the food, trying to change the subject, but Carlos wasn't done. He took another sip of whiskey and leaned back. "You know what's funny?" He slurred slightly. "When we first met, she acted all confident and independent. Now she's clingy, always asking where I am, who I'm texting." My stomach twisted. I felt exposed, like I was being dissected in front of strangers. I said, "Carlos, stop it." But he just laughed and turned to Alex and Becky. "She checks my phone when I'm in the shower every time." That was a lie. I had never once checked his phone. Becky looked uncomfortable. Alex cleared his throat. "Maybe we should just eat." I wanted to scream, cry, run, but all I could do was sit there, frozen. My face was burning, my appetite gone, and Carlos, he just smirked like he'd won something. Something inside me snapped. All the years I spent trying to be the supportive wife, all the times I made excuses for Carlos's bad moods, all the moments I bit my tongue to keep the peace, they all crashed down in that instant. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping the floor. Carlos looked up at me with a smirk, clearly expecting a scene. I picked up my full glass of Coke and held it above his head. For a second, I saw the realization hit him that I wasn't bluffing. Then I poured it. Right over his perfect hair, his smug face, his expensive shirt. The whole glass. He gasped and flinched as the cold drink soaked him. The table went completely silent. Alex whispered, "Holy shit." Carlos sat there dripping, stunned. It was the first time all night he didn't have something to say. I grabbed my purse, turned around, and walked out without looking back. My hands were shaking, but my steps were steady. I didn't even stop when I heard someone calling my name. That moment didn't fix everything, but it was mine. The second I stepped outside the restaurant, the night air hit me like a wave. I felt my chest heaving, hands still trembling from the adrenaline. My phone buzzed immediately, texts from Carlos, then Alex, then Carlos again. I didn't open any of them, I just kept walking. My heels clicked against the sidewalk as I made my way to the parking lot, every step helping me breathe a little easier. It felt like I had just jumped out of a burning building. I got to our car, technically, and sat in the driver's seat for a full minute before even putting the keys in. I kept replaying it in my head. The Coke, the silence, the look on his face. Was it really over? Had I just ended my marriage in the middle of a restaurant with a glass of soda? A shaky laugh escaped my lips, more out of disbelief than humor. I wasn't sure whether to cry, scream, or drive to another city. But eventually, I started the car. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. I drove home in silence, my mind spinning. The streets were empty, glowing under the soft haze of streetlights. I kept imagining Carlos still sitting there, soaked, looking ridiculous. It gave me a tiny flicker of satisfaction. But mostly, I just felt numb. When I reached our apartment, everything looked normal, too normal. His jacket was still on the hook, his shoes by the door. The stupid coffee mug he used every morning was sitting on the counter with a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. I wanted to throw it at the wall, but I didn't. Maybe because I'd be the one cleaning it up, or maybe because leaving it untouched felt like a louder statement. I changed into sweatpants and washed my hands 3 times, trying to scrub off the stickiness of the Coke and everything that happened. I left the front light on, I don't know why, maybe so he'd know I wasn't hiding. At 1 a.m., I heard the door buzzer. I didn't answer. I watched my phone light up with his name over and over again, and then I blocked his number. I barely slept. I think I got maybe 3 hours total, if that. When my alarm went off, I just stared at the ceiling, numb. The apartment felt like a stranger's place now, every detail too familiar but suddenly wrong. I shuffled into the kitchen, made coffee like a robot. No sugar, no cream, just bitter and black. I checked my phone, momentarily unblocking Carlos just to see what fresh hell was waiting. Sure enough, a wall of messages. "You embarrassed me, you owe me an apology, you're blowing this out of proportion." Not a single "I'm sorry." Not one hint of regret, just accusations, gaslighting, and blame. He even said, "Alex and Becky think you're crazy." I dropped the phone on the counter. My hands were shaking again. It wasn't just the hurt, it was the sheer disbelief that he could twist everything so fast. I started writing a reply, but halfway through, I deleted it. What was the point? He didn't want a conversation. He wanted control, and I wasn't giving it to him anymore. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and left. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't stay there anymore. I ended up at my parents' place. I didn't even think, I just drove. The whole ride there, I kept replaying the night in my head. The Coke, the silence, Carlos's face. I wasn't sure if I was more ashamed or proud. When I got there, my mom answered the door and took one look at me before pulling me into a hug. She didn't ask anything right away, just handed me a blanket and guided me to the kitchen. My dad was already up, watching the news with a coffee in hand. He didn't say anything at first, just gave me a long, quiet look. I told them everything. Every word Carlos said, every awful comment. My mom's face changed with each detail: shock, anger, heartbreak. My dad stayed silent for a long time. Then he set his coffee down, stood up, and walked out of the room. A few minutes later, I heard the garage door open and his car start. I didn't ask where he was going. I just sat there, wrapped in a blanket, clutching a mug of coffee I couldn't drink, letting the warmth seep into my frozen hands. I spent most of the morning at my parents' kitchen table, phone in hand, pretending to read emails while scrolling social media. Carlos hadn't stopped texting. I kept seeing his name flash across the top of my screen like a warning label. At some point, I stopped reading the messages. They were all the same: blame, guilt-tripping, twisted half-truths. Around noon, I got a string of texts from Becky. That surprised me. She never texts unless it's about a group dinner. Her first message was, "Hey, are you okay?" Then Carlos is freaking out. He's telling everyone you attacked him in public. And then, "I know what really happened." I stared at those words for a long time. I barely knew how to respond. Becky, the same woman who scrolled Instagram while Carlos humiliated me, was suddenly concerned. I finally replied, "Thanks, I'm fine." Her next message hit harder. "He's saying you were drunk, that he was trying to calm you down." I almost dropped my phone. I had a Coke, one Coke. He had 3 whiskeys, I typed back. "He's in damage control mode," and put the phone down. Around 1 p.m., my dad came back. He walked into the kitchen like nothing happened, placed his keys on the counter, and started making a sandwich. My mom asked where he'd gone, and he just muttered, "Out." I didn't press. I didn't want to know. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I froze. My mom stood slowly and peeked through the curtain, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's Carlos," she whispered. My heart dropped. Before I could react, my dad walked straight to the front door and opened it. Carlos stood there looking a mess, his hair unkempt, eyes bloodshot, still wearing yesterday's clothes. "I need to talk to her," he said, loud and agitated. My dad blocked the doorway. "You need to leave." Carlos tried to push past him, but my dad shoved him back, not hard but firm. Carlos's voice rose. He started yelling, accusing me of humiliating him, ruining his life. My mom stood between us, holding me back. I didn't move. I just watched as Carlos screamed and my dad refused to flinch. Then, finally, Carlos stormed off. No apology, just rage. After Carlos left, the house felt like it was holding its breath. No one spoke for a long time. My dad just stood there, arms crossed, breathing hard, staring at the closed door. My mom had tears in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. I slowly walked to the couch and sat down, my legs suddenly too heavy. My phone lit up again. Missed calls, texts from Alex. "What happened? Call me. This is getting crazy." Even Becky chimed in. "Did he really come to your parents' house?" I didn't answer any of them. I couldn't. I went upstairs and locked myself in the guest room, phone still buzzing. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my arms wrapped tightly around a pillow. My parents were arguing downstairs, their voices muffled but sharp. I didn't listen to the words. I just curled tighter, trying to breathe through the rising anxiety. For a second, I thought about packing a bag and disappearing, just driving until I ran out of road. But no, why should I run? He made this mess, not me. I wasn't going to disappear, not this time. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I just lay on the guest bed, watching my phone light up every few minutes with more notifications. Carlos wasn't giving up texts, missed calls, even voice messages now. He kept switching tones, angry, sad, manipulative, apologetic, like he was auditioning for the role of a heartbroken husband. I didn't respond. I wanted to, but I knew better. Every reply would be ammunition for him to twist. Around 10 p.m., I finally blocked his number again. The silence afterward was loud, but it was better than the chaos. My mom knocked on the door once, asked if I needed anything. I said no. She left a small plate of toast and tea outside anyway. I didn't touch it. I stared at the shadows on the ceiling, wondering how my life had turned into this. I used to think love meant enduring things, being patient, forgiving. But now I was starting to realize love wasn't supposed to make you feel small. I wasn't broken, I was just done. And that was the scariest clarity I'd ever had. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My eyes were dry, my mouth tasted stale, and every part of me felt heavier than usual. But I got up anyway. I brushed my teeth, tied my hair back, and put on actual clothes, a sweater and jeans instead of pajamas. It felt like armor. I didn't know what I was preparing for, but something told me it was coming. I went downstairs. My mom was already up, folding laundry at the kitchen table. She looked at me and smiled softly, like she was trying not to scare me away. I poured a cup of coffee, sat down, and scrolled through my phone. More messages from Carlos, more missed calls, one voicemail from his mom. I didn't open it. Instead, I opened my group chats, Carlos's cousins, his friends, even his mom, and I started typing. I didn't rage, I didn't rant. I just told the truth, what he said, how he acted, what he did. I ended with, "If you want to know why I left, ask him what he said to me at dinner." Then I hit send and blocked them all. The fallout was immediate. Within minutes of hitting send, I started getting notifications. Carlos's friends, some I hadn't spoken to in years, started replying. Some said nothing at all, just left the group chat. Others sent short, awkward messages, wow, or didn't know it was like that. A few apologized. Alex messaged me privately, I'm so sorry, I didn't know how bad it was. I appreciated it even if it was late. Becky sent a vague, hope you're okay, that I ignored. My cousin texted asking if I needed anything. I didn't reply to her either. I just sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone like it might explode. My mom made lunch, put a plate in front of me, and didn't say a word. I ate in silence, chewing slowly, trying to process it all. For the first time in days, Carlos was quiet. No texts, no calls, just silence. It didn't feel peaceful, it felt like a storm holding its breath. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Whatever came next, I was finally ready to face it without shrinking. That afternoon, I packed a small, overnight bag. Not because I was leaving for good, but because I needed to feel like I had a choice. I needed to remind myself that I wasn't trapped. I shoved in a few clothes, my laptop, chargers, and that one houseplant I somehow hadn't killed after 2 years. My dad didn't ask what I was doing. He just handed me his spare car key and said, "Don't let it run on empty." I hugged my mom before I left, and she squeezed me so tightly it made my ribs ache. I drove around aimlessly for a while through old neighborhoods, past places Carlos and I used to go. I ended up in a park near downtown, sitting on a bench under a tree with my hoodie pulled tight. The wind felt cold against my face, but it also felt like air, real air. I watched people walk their dogs, kids chase pigeons, someone playing guitar near the fountain. Life was still happening. The world hadn't stopped just because mine cracked, and somehow that made me feel stronger. When I got back to my parents' house that evening, the sky had already turned deep blue. The porch light was on, and I stood there for a moment before going in, just watching the glow spill onto the steps like a welcome mat. Inside, the TV murmured in the living room and something smelled like cinnamon. My mom was baking again, her way of coping. My dad nodded at me from his chair, a crossword puzzle in hand. No one asked where I'd been. I appreciated that. I went upstairs and unpacked my small bag. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe without checking over my shoulder. Then, right as I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone buzzed. A DM from Becky. Carlos is spiraling. He's posting stuff online, cryptic quotes, sad music, saying you destroyed him. I stared at the message for a while, then tossed my phone on the blanket. Let him post. Let him play the victim. I was done cleaning up his mess. And I wasn't going to let guilt undo the progress I'd made in just 24 hours of silence. The next few days blurred together. I stayed mostly in the guest room, alternating between scrolling aimlessly and staring at the ceiling. Friends started texting, checking in, some curious, others concerned. I responded to a few. Others I ignored. My mom kept making food I didn't eat. My dad kept pretending everything was normal. But what surprised me most was the quiet. Carlos wasn't calling anymore. No more emails. No new numbers trying to sneak through. It was like he'd gone silent all at once, and that silence was louder than any voicemail. Then, on the third morning, a knock came at the front door. I froze. My mom answered. She called up the stairs, voice tight. "It's one of Carlos's friends." I came down slowly. It was Kevin, one of his oldest buddies. He held a box in his arms. "He asked me to return your stuff," he said awkwardly. I took the box. Inside were my books, a sweater, my headphones, and a mug that said, "Let me overthink this." I almost laughed. "Thanks," I said quietly. He nodded and left. It felt weirdly final. Later that night, I finally unpacked the box Kevin brought. I sat cross-legged on the floor of the guest room, carefully pulling out the items one by one. My sweater still smelled faintly like our old apartment. The mug made me smile, but only for a second. Underneath everything, folded neatly, was a letter. No envelope, just my name written across the front in Carlos's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time, then I opened it. It wasn't an apology. It was 4 pages of excuses, blame, and manipulative language disguised as sincerity. Phrases like, "You made me act that way," "if you hadn't embarrassed me," and "I was under pressure." I read it once. Then again, each time it felt less like closure and more like one last attempt to control the story. I folded the letter, walked to the kitchen, and dropped it in the trash. My mom watched silently but said nothing. I went back upstairs and pulled the covers over my head. It didn't feel like victory, not yet, but it felt like momentum, and for now, that was enough. The next morning, I woke up with a strange stillness in my chest. Not peace exactly, but the absence of panic. I got dressed, made my own coffee, and sat outside on the small patio behind my parents' house. The air was cool and the neighborhood was just waking up. Birds, distant lawn mowers, the hum of life continuing. I scrolled through my phone. Carlos had posted again. A long, dramatic rant about betrayal, forgiveness, and how people show their true colors under pressure. He didn't mention me by name, but it didn't matter. Everyone knew. Comments were a mix of support, confusion, and subtle shade. I didn't engage, I didn't screenshot, I just closed the app. A few minutes later, I opened a job listing site. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I needed to look, needed to move. Even if it was just digital motion. I wasn't running anymore, I was rebuilding. And that day, in the early quiet of someone else's backyard, I realized something. Carlos may still be yelling into the void, but I had stopped listening. Finally, that afternoon, my mom came into the guest room with a quiet knock. She sat at the edge of the bed and held out a small envelope. "Your aunt's friend is a realtor," she said gently. "She has a few listings if you want to look." I blinked. A place of my own? The thought had felt distant, even impossible, but now it stirred something, a flicker of direction. I opened the envelope. Inside were a few printed listings. Small apartments, studio spaces, not fancy but clean. Manageable, real. I didn't say anything at first, just held the pages in my lap and stared at the photos. My mom didn't push. She just squeezed my hand before heading back downstairs. I spent the next hour reading every line of every listing, highlighting, comparing, dreaming. Then I did something that surprised even me. I picked one and sent an inquiry. Just like that, it felt small but massive, not a new life yet, but maybe the key to one. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was planning. 2 days later, I went to see the apartment. It was a tiny one-bedroom on the second floor of an older building with creaky stairs and faded hallways. But the moment I stepped inside, something clicked. The sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors like a welcome. The windows were old but charming, the kitchen tiny but clean. It smelled like dust and lavender. The landlord, an older woman with kind eyes and a clipboard, gave me space to wander. I ran my hand along the countertop, opened a cabinet, peeked into the empty bedroom. It wasn't much, but it felt mine, or at least like it could be. I turned to the landlord and said, "I'll take it." She smiled, surprised but warm. I signed the papers that afternoon. It was scary and thrilling and strangely quiet in my head. That night, I stood in the empty apartment, holding the keys in my palm, listening to the echoes of my own footsteps. It didn't feel like the end of something anymore. It felt like a beginning, a messy, uncertain, terrifying beginning, and I was ready. Moving day came faster than I expected. My parents helped me load boxes into my dad's car. It wasn't much, just clothes, a few books, kitchen stuff, and that stubborn houseplant that had somehow survived everything. My mom fussed over every item, wrapping mugs in newspaper, taping boxes twice. My dad didn't say much, but he carried everything with care. When we arrived at the apartment, the landlord met us at the door, handing over the final paperwork. I signed it with a shaky hand. It felt real now. Inside, everything echoed, the walls, our voices, even the tape ripping from the roll. We unpacked slowly, laughing at how small the fridge was and how crooked the towel rack hung. But it was mine, all mine. When the last box was inside, my mom hugged me a little too long, and my dad handed me a toolbox like it was a sacred rite of passage. After they left, I sat on the floor in the middle of the room, surrounded by boxes and sunlight. I didn't know what came next, but I wasn't scared. Not anymore. The first night in my new apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. I had no curtains yet, so the city light leaked through the windows, painting soft orange lines across the floor. I ate dinner sitting on the floor. Instant noodles and tea. No table, no chairs, just a pillow and a box as my makeshift setup. But it didn't feel sad. It felt earned. I took a long shower, longer than I probably should have, and stood in front of the mirror wrapped in a towel, staring at my reflection. I looked older somehow, like I'd lived a year in the span of a week. I brushed my hair, cleaned the sink, then made a little bed out of my comforter and some extra blankets on the floor. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the walls still echoing, but this time the silence felt like mine. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, smiled to myself, and whispered, "We're okay." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was the first page of something new, and I was proud I'd made it this far. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight in my face and no alarm clock screaming at me. It was the first time in what felt like forever that I'd actually slept through the night. I stretched out on the floor bed and took a deep breath. My body still ached, but in a satisfying way. I brewed my first cup of coffee in my tiny kitchen, standing barefoot on cold tiles, humming to myself without even realizing it. The apartment was quiet, except for the occasional creak of old pipes and birds outside the window. I opened the window a crack to let the morning air in. It smelled like dust, coffee, and freedom. I took my mug and sat by the window, legs pulled up, sipping slowly. I knew there would still be hard days, loneliness, unexpected emotions, maybe even more messages from Carlos, but none of that felt bigger than me anymore. I had space now, real, physical, emotional space. And in that moment, wrapped in a blanket of light and stillness, I let myself believe something radical, that I was going to be okay. Later that week, I invited my best friend over. She brought takeout and a bottle of wine, and we sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, laughing like we hadn't in months. She looked around and said, "It's small, but it's so you." And for once, I agreed. We ate straight from the containers, wine glasses resting on a stack of books I hadn't shelved yet. I told her everything, what Carlos had said, what he'd done, the letter, the breakdown, the slow crawl back to this moment. She didn't interrupt, just listened and refilled my glass when I paused. At one point, I started crying, silent, unexpected tears, not from sadness but from release. She moved closer, wrapping me in a hug that felt like exhaling after holding your breath too long. "You did the hard part," she whispered. "Now you get to build something new." That night after she left, I cleaned up, brushed my teeth, and crawled into my floor bed. I felt empty in the best way possible. Like I'd poured out all the hurt, all the fear, and now there was finally room for something better. The following weekend, I went to the local market alone. I hadn't done that in ages. There was something strangely empowering about walking through crowded stalls, picking fruit, comparing prices, choosing flowers just because they were pretty. I bought a small bunch of yellow tulips, a loaf of fresh bread, and some cheese I couldn't pronounce. Back at the apartment, I opened the windows wide, put on music, and filled a chipped glass jar with the tulips. They looked absurdly bright against the bare wall, but I loved them. I made a little lunch, plated it nicely just for myself, and sat at the windowsill to eat. I wasn't thinking about Carlos. I wasn't bracing for the next message or apology or threat. For once, my mind wasn't circling him. It was circling me, my choices, my peace, my space. Healing isn't a straight line, I knew that. But that day, I felt it curve gently in the right direction. Not because anything big had happened, but because I'd bought flowers for myself and believed I deserved them. That evening, I got a message from Carlos's cousin. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, and seeing her name made my stomach lurch for a second. But the message was simple. "He's still spiraling, just wanted to say I believe you." I always did. I stared at it for a long moment, then replied, "Thank you, that means more than you know." I didn't cry, I didn't shake. I just smiled, tucked my phone away, and went back to rearranging the bookshelf. I'd found an old one at a thrift store and spent the afternoon sanding and repainting it. Now I was placing my favorite books in neat little rows, running my fingers across their spines. It felt like I was curating a version of myself I hadn't seen in a long time, the girl who loved stories, who collected words, who believed in new chapters. The bookshelf wasn't perfect, crooked in places, chipped paint on one side, but it was mine. Just like this new life I was slowly building, not flawless, not fast, but real, and for once that was more than enough. A week later, I passed Carlos on the street. It wasn't planned. I was leaving the corner cafe with a bag of pastries when I saw him across the intersection. For a split second, everything froze, the traffic, the noise, my heartbeat. He saw me too. His expression flickered from surprise to something unreadable. He looked smaller somehow, like a person trying to play a role that no longer fit. He didn't wave, he didn't say anything. Just stood there staring like he couldn't believe I was real. And me, I didn't flinch, I didn't rush away. I just looked back calmly like he was part of some old story I had already closed the book on. Then the light changed and we walked in opposite directions. I didn't turn around, not once. And in that moment, I felt something release inside me, like a thread snapping, quiet but final. He was just a person now. A shadow I'd stepped out from. I went home, poured coffee into my favorite mug, and sat by the window with my pastries. For the first time, his absence felt like peace, not loss. That Sunday, I took myself out. No reason, no plan, just me, a journal, and a small coffee shop tucked away from the noise. I sat by the window, sipped a caramel latte, and started writing, not about Carlos, not about the past, but about the future. Dreams, ideas, things I wanted to try. I wrote like no one would ever read it. For the first time, I wasn't editing myself. Halfway through my second cup, the barista came by and asked if I wanted a refill. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Yes, please." My voice didn't shake, my hands didn't tremble. I felt grounded, real, whole. When I left, the sky was soft with late afternoon light. I walked slowly, no destination in mind. Just existing in my own rhythm, and for once that felt like more than enough. Not every ending needs fireworks. Some just need silence, breath, and the quiet confidence that you've made it through the worst of it. This wasn't a love story. Not really, it was a story about me, and I was finally ready to live it.